Hello again, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Women, where we provide a space for women in Reiki to discuss and explore their present day joys and challenges. My name is Michaela with Heartscapes Reiki, and this is a collaboration between myself, Bronwyn Logan of the International House of Reiki, and Carrie Varela of the Reiki Healing Society. Welcome back.
Hello.
So we are in just our second broadcast of this podcast and YouTube channel, and we're spending some time working with the foundational questions that we would like to ask the women who come to be interviewed in this space. And last time we had a really lovely conversation about our personal journeys to Reiki, what drew us to this work. And today we want to open up a conversation about, what it has meant to us in our journey to specifically be in the identity of a woman and how that interacts with our experience as a Reiki practitioner. And so let's just begin by talking a little bit about, just kind of what are some of the challenges that we as women have experienced in our lives, some of the particular joys and opportunities that being a woman has afforded us. And then we'll transition to talking about how that connects with our Reiki experience. So friends, what comes up for you when you reflect back on your experience as a woman?
I'll start. Yeah, so I guess when I think about the challenges and joys that I face as a woman in society, and just, when I think about the patriarchy, which is not one of my favorite topics or subjects, but certainly relevant to the conversation. I know for myself, when I was growing up, I was raised by my mom predominantly, and both my family, both my parents. But my mom mostly raised me as a stay-at-home mom, and I had 4 siblings. And so my mom gave me a lot, a lot of her time, a lot of her energy, a lot of her focus. And I saw her struggle so much with her identity. Because her worth, her self-worth was so much about raising her kids. And especially as I grew older and eventually moved out of the home, my mom really just struggled with her identity, right? So she didn't know who she was. She had struggled finding a sense of self-worth, and I always saw that struggle, and it hurt me. It hurt me to see my mom, who I cared about so much, loved so much. I know how much she gave to me, to feel like she didn't have a sense of worth in society outside of our home and our family. And, and then in my youth, I just made a contract to myself. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give and sacrifice everything I have to my family and struggle to maintain an identity outside of my family. And so that was really one of the reasons that prompted me to always pursue a career. Even as I have young children at home, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I feel a lot of pressure and have felt a lot of pressure since I became a mom, basically to just not do anything and, set my career off to the side, and have really faced a lot of struggles to basically earn a living, as a mom, and felt like a society pressure of I should be at home with my kids, but also there's just the real life struggles of somebody who has a child under 5 years old that's not in a public education system, and the cost of childcare and what it takes to run, your own business, be a mom, pay a babysitter, and bring home any pennies to yourself. And so I know that that's a struggle that I've really felt a lot. And for the last, 4 or 5 years have been super heavy on my heart, and been working through all of those challenges and struggling to find my own identity outside of my home, my family, but also being felt like there's some pushback from society being no, shut the door, go back to your family and your home and just be a mom. That's all we want you to be, when I know that women are so much more than that. And I really want to change that paradigm in my life, and hopefully for other women too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think that weighs on so many women, especially, as you say, having kids. And it seems, I don't know why, but it does seem like possibly because we give birth to them, but also how things have been set up in society that, our children are our responsibility in a sense. Often for women, they'll end up being the woman's responsibility. And yet we don't have equal pay. It's almost like it's keeping women and children in a less financial state.
Yeah, I really relate to a lot of what both of you have shared there. And when I thought about, how what was feeling most important to me in thinking about this question in this moment, what really came up was the ways in which the patriarchal structure that underlines many societies today and has for a very long time. And of course, there's pockets where that is different, and there's periods of time when things are different. But certainly in my lifetime, that's been the part of the undercurrent is patriarchal capitalist society. And I really was reflecting on the ways in which that constrains all of us, right? Whether we are a woman, a man, non-binary, whatever our identity is, we're constrained by that structure. And so when I thought about, the challenges that afforded me in particular, growing up female, I reflected back on all of these moments where I felt like I couldn't really be myself because of some constraint. And that actually started with the constraints of a certain feminist perspective that, because we had struggled to be, allowed to work and to, not always have to be staying at home with the children and, gaining independence in terms of being able to have our own money and be in control of our own assets, that therefore it was my responsibility to work and to, work outside of the home, and that was what was normal and good. And I did that and, fell into that for many years and, did a career that I loved and appreciated. But at the same time, there was a part of me that really buckled under that expectation that I, was expected to, hold down a full-time job in a particular way, making a particular salary, because that's what we had earned for ourselves as women, as a resistance to being stuck in the house for so long. At least for some women, that certainly isn't a universal experience, but that's tends to be the experience that my family had. And so at a certain point, that felt constricting. It was really, it was a real like kind of paradigm shifting moment when I realized that like, I don't actually want that for myself. Like there's this feminist ideal of being a strong woman working outside of the house that I've always worked to uphold, but I don't actually want it. It's not actually true to my way and my being.
Yeah.
I actually think I would be a really amazing, stay-at-home mom. And I've never had the opportunity to be that, right? Part of which being, the economic constraints that we're under. And so when I think about, what's that challenge been like? It's been working inside of these expectations without the kind of freedom to really investigate what I actually want and how I can best express my purpose and my value and my contribution to my family and to my community and the world. And, how amazing it is when we can kind of loosen up those rigid expectations and lean more into like, what is my genuine contribution outside of those boxes that we put ourselves into, right? Because similarly, women who, had an amazing contribution to make out there as a professional person who had the experience of being expected to stay at home with the kids, had that same experience from an opposite perspective. So like, how can we all not be so fixed inside of that dualistic view? And, largely that's what Reiki has meant to me, is challenging that.
Yeah, for me, that idea that you're talking about having to be yourself is an interesting one. I remember back in the 1980s and thinking, women are so out there, and we're so equal. And now looking back on that, I realized that that was not the case, but it was certainly how something about me felt like that. And I guess it was a progression of how things have changed for women over time, definitely, but still not really realizing what was going on. And I know someone said to me once about women in movies, and they said it's really unusual to hear a woman speak with her own voice, like a real voice. And I thought, that is so true. It's something we don't pick up these things. And I was thinking, that's so true. It's like putting on the voice of what a woman perhaps should sound like, or that particular woman should sound like, obviously. But, that it's more girly or more, and possibly today this is changing. I'm pretty sure it probably is. But it's interesting how we've put ourselves in places and not really realized with that. And I was thinking personally about myself and that idea of, especially within a family structure, how we come across, how do we be ourselves, and what might that actually be? Because for me, I've always loved writing, and I'd always find time to write, like within the family structure, by getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, for example, or, doing this sort of thing where it's outside of the family concept, right? However, in that same idea, I know that if my partner is wanting to do something like that, that's within the family structure rather than outside of the family structure. And look, I'm blaming myself for this. It's that whole thing of a woman going, oh yeah, this is for me, so I have to do this outside of that. But if it's for a man, then it needs to be inside of that, and I'll make sure that that works for them. Yeah. And the same for the children. I never thought I'd do that ever in my life. Remember, as a kid, you're talking about your parents and that, like as a kid thinking, oh, my mum always putting herself, at a point that would put everybody else first. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to be like that. I want to be the same, equal. And yet there is that ingrained sense that we still do it, and we can't help ourselves from doing that. Well, for me, at any rate, I'm talking from a personal perspective. And, I think the only person to blame is in many ways myself. I'm the one who has to stand up and go, well, actually, I'd like to do this now. Yeah. And you guys have to make space for that. And that I think in the past is not something that I've necessarily been very good at.
It takes a lot of strength, I think, to stand in that and say, like, this is what I need, and I need you, everyone around me, to conform to my needs as I do that for you every friggin' day.
Well, and particularly when it's like you're speaking up for needs that are actually in opposition to what we're taught that we're supposed to do, right? It's not neutral. It's not like you're saying everything, is equal here. And in this equal space, I've been kind of subverting my needs, and now I need to, assert them. It's like we walk into a structure that expects us to defer and to keep our needs outside of the family structure, as you were just saying. And so that when we, push back against that, now we're bucking not just like habits that we've formed inside of our family, but expectations that are existing outside of our family. And even when we, and possibly our partners, and maybe even our parents or extended family, like consciously disagrees with that structure, right? It's still in us, right? It's like patriarchy is in us, right? Like white supremacy is in us because it's what we get raised up inside of. And so that pushing back, that asserting something that should be obviously given and not a problem, it's like we're pushing back against much more than our own habits, I guess is what I'm saying.
100%. I agree. But, the only person, when I was looking at, we said we're going to talk about society, family, and ourselves. Yeah. When I looked at all of that, I kept coming back to myself because, the only person who can change society is me. Yeah. And the same as my family. And then, what you were saying, Michaela, about being yourself. So somehow we need to find that. And I guess, as you know, that brings us then into that next section, which is, you know, how has the system of Reiki helped us to do that? Or how is it helping us to do that? I've certainly got leaps and bounds yet to take, but you know,
Absolutely.
doing my best.
Yeah. Carrie, do you want to share a bit about what comes up for you there?
Yeah, I mean, well, what has come up for me too is just that, you know, I think I worked a corporate job in a cubicle for the first 7 years of my career, and I hated it. You know, I hated it so much. Something about being in cubicle in particular was really hard on me, and maybe the hours, the commitment of hours. And so before I had children, and once I shifted into teaching yoga and Reiki and offering Reiki treatments, I loved like the freedom of my schedule. You know, I could schedule things, I could schedule, you know, yoga classes and intermix throughout my day. And the freedom in that was really liberating for me. And so ultimately, like that kind of is one thing that I think Reiki really has empowered me to do, is to have a different lifestyle and schedule, in particular as it relates to my career, and just have a little bit more fluidity. And of course, that kind of came up into challenges when I had my kids, because I didn't even realize it. But at the time, I was working like 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And you try to fit your kids into childcare into that. And it was just impossible. Right. And so I had to now really start conforming my schedule. And now I feel a lot more like, oh, wow, what would it be like to just earn for 8 hours in a row? Because that's not how my life is structured right now. But I honestly love it. I love that every, even, 3 times throughout the day, I might be doing something totally different. And so that really feeds me. But I mean, on a deeper level, when you look at pressures that we have inside of ourselves that are unbeknownst, so I kind of, the way I was born and raised, and I had a lot of trauma growing up, and I really had to struggle and fight against some pressures that I was given to me as a child, that didn't meet my expectations of what my life was as an adult, especially in relationship, marriage, in a lot of different ways. And so Reiki really has been this practice that just calls me back into myself, helps me connect to who I really am and what's really important to me. And that's what I love what you said, Michaela. It's like, I work this job and I, found so much out of, being in a more career type setting. But I finally came to the conclusion that that kind of work really didn't appeal to me. And I think women, the way we want to show up in society and in the world might look different than a 9-to-5 job. And I think that that's that next level of evolution of how we want to be outside of our home.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think most women, I mean, I cannot speak for men here, but I think most women do want to spend time with their kids, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, maybe that's just not how society works for us at the moment, for a lot of women, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, how wonderful that you can do both. Yeah. Work and, is it because we just don't value being, is it we just don't value mothers? And possibly.
That's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
and related to that, we also, as a society, don't tend to value women who choose not to be mothers, right? Like a woman who's like, that's not actually my path, right? Gets all kinds of pushback from society. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, what you're made to do, right? And so it's again, there's all of these ways in which we're put inside of this box of expectation that's incredibly dualistic, and says, because of your biology, you're expected to shape your life like this.
Yeah.
And that's just not how we operate, right? We shape our lives based on many, many factors that transcend our biology quite a bit. And so I think that, and I think that everybody to some extent feels that, right? It's not just women who feel that constriction and feel that dualistic pressure. it shows up in particular ways, like depending on how we present. And, for me, Reiki, in a really gentle way over time, has been breaking down that internal sense of that dualistic structure, and has been just gently working on that sense inside of myself that there's something wrong with me because I don't want to conform to different, expectations, and has opened up more sense of possibility of what might actually be available. And in particular, since I've started studying and practicing from the perspective of its Japanese origins, because of the explicit focus on non-duality and on interconnection and on taking a broader, wider view on what it means to be alive and what it means to contribute and what it means to actually just be, and express ourselves that way. I've been able to live into a different way of managing my life that I never would have considered as a viable option, right? And some of, you've spoken to some of that already, like in terms of logistical scheduling looking different, and just the way I'm getting my needs met looks very different than I would have ever imagined. But more so, like, that's the external evidence of something that's really quite internal, which is this slow dissolving of those boxes and those expectations that I grew up conforming myself to. And as I do that internal work, I'm able to approach other people with less dualistic expectations about them and how they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to show up. And so it's just really interesting watching that ripple out, watching that impact my kids, watching that impact my interactions with other people. And as you said, Bronwyn, it's absolutely ongoing, right? It's not something that like, oh, I'll just have it all figured out one day. Like, oh, that's enough of that, right? It's like that beauty of sinking into a lifestyle of diligent, committed practice to a way.
Yeah. For me, it's not just, even though it's a big thing, being able to work professionally as a Reiki teacher and a practitioner, which is, I think you both said that, very freeing and giving us an opportunity to work in a way that works for us, as individuals, as parents. But it's also the personal and that thing of say frustration, if there's frustration or anger, these things which come about through experiences where life might not be being, true to who you are. If you're not being true to who you are, and that sense of frustration in that, I think this is where the system of Reiki comes in, and where it gives us tools and it gives us also an intellectual understanding. It sort of gives both. So we have the experience and we have the tools to help us understand more of who we are and what we're going through and how we can dissolve these feelings and move into a better space in our lives. I definitely think that the system of Reiki does support us with that. And that is because I think we all have things that, I was just saying before, like that I use the example of the writing thing, but ways of working with that. Carrie, you were saying, how do we actually get the rest of the world to work with us in a way that's going to be supportive for ourselves and also supportive for everybody else as well, but that there is this balance happening.
Absolutely. I love that idea of like a slow dissolve, and I feel like that really resonates for me in terms of how I've experienced Reiki healing and the energy of like maybe I'm really feeling the pressures of motherhood, of earning, of X, Y, and Z, and that if I can focus my mind enough to really get at the root issue, like there's this awareness there at the root issue, and maybe it might be something very simple, just one little etch out of, a rock, or what feels like a rock. And just doing that gradually over time can become so liberating. And that's my experience of Reiki. It's definitely like, it has that nature of just like, let's look, what is it that's really off today? What is it that's really like in that circumstance, what has been triggered?
Yeah.
Getting really specific and into that trigger, and then unwinding it, or forgiving it, or acknowledging it. And that's my experience of how Reiki helps me heal.
Yeah, bringing that consciousness to what is actually going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, when you were speaking, I was thinking the simple and profound practice of just for today, I anger not about all of this stuff that is putting pressure on me, right? Like just for today, I worry not about those things and how my life is going to look if I'm not fitting into those boxes. And just the gentle dissolution of attachment to being angry about the state of the world and being afraid about my place in it, not to disregard feeling those feelings, but to let them teach us what we're supposed to be doing or what we're supposed to be focusing our attention on, and then letting them go, not being attached to them. Like that in and of itself is a profound gift to being different in the world.
Yeah.
Totally different in the world. And I feel like that's really been a lot on my heart lately, of like what Reiki has also helped me be, is like being strong in my differences. And after 15 years of, being a Reiki practitioner, there's times where I feel very isolated and felt very alone because, the work is kind of fringe. It's not that accepted by society. It's not really accepted within most medical professions. And yeah, it's so peaceful and profound. I've had such amazing experience of Reiki. I believe in it so, but it's a lot of pressure to hold that belief and live in that faith every day, for your income, and for that reason, I think that, being a Reiki practitioner as a professional is not necessarily for everyone. I think there's a lot of different mosaic of like how you can relate to Reiki, and it doesn't have to be on a career path, but nevertheless, as a career path, like for me, like that's one thing that's been really challenging. But Reiki has given me that strength to be courageous in my difference and in my beliefs, and to step forward in that role of leadership. And what I really see, like if I could like kind of clear through the woods of my own mind through that, what I think there is just a different way that women want to show up in the world.
Yeah.
And maybe it's working more one-to-one with clients, or maybe it's putting love into something that they make with their hands, but that's women's work too. And I think some part of the patriarchy is to dissolving the patriarchy is to like release like the expectation that a woman working needs to look exactly how men have showed up in the professional sphere.
Yeah.
And that she can't bring traditionally masculine traits into that work, right? Because we learned that a Reiki practice must be both firm and flexible, right? So we need aspects of ourself that, sometimes are gendered, right? Like being organized, being assertive, being clear, being direct, being able to approach somebody with a request and with a proposition and not be looked at as being too aggressive, right? Things that are often gendered male, but that are just part of the skill set that humanity has.
We need.
And so, again, how can we integrate that and not look at that as a dualistic view of like, because I have a woman's body and because I, love to lean into my feminine traits, that I can't also bring traits that tend to be gendered masculine and hold both of those. In fact, I function badly when I don't do that. My business suffered for years because I did not bring traditionally gendered masculine traits into running my business.
Yeah.
And, getting very clear that like, I get to hold all of it in my own space, and I get to work on strengthening the parts that I wasn't encouraged to strengthen because of my gender, has made a huge impact on whether I can successfully, live my life the way that I want to live it.
Mm. So I'm just curious, Michaela, when you worked in a more professional career, I don't like that term. It's not the right term, but like, do you feel like you couldn't be assertive? You couldn't like step into roles of leadership? Like I felt like that. I felt that.
Yeah.
You have to be very passive and be like, well, what man is going to tell me what to do today?
Well, the thing is, like, I spent 12 years before launching my business running a leadership development program at a women's college. So my experience of the expectations of how leadership looked were very, very, very specific to a subculture, right? And I think inside of that, it was almost the opposite. It was almost what I was speaking of earlier, is that I was expected to step forward with these assertive leadership traits and to teach those to students. And I just wasn't very good at them. Right. Yeah. And there wasn't anything teaching me how to bring more of those traits in. It was just an expectation. And so I've had to look back at that and say, my natural tendency does lean towards feminine traits, which didn't actually serve me well at all in that job. Right. Like all of the masculine traits tended to be what would have served me better, but there wasn't a way to develop that. It was just an expectation. And so as I've stepped out of that, I've had to be more disciplined and okay, part of what was challenging about that work was that I wasn't balanced in these traits. And I need them if I'm going to be in charge of my own business, right? Nobody else telling me what to do. And so at that point, it became okay, I have to cultivate these things. I need some structure around that. I need some business coaching, right? I need to pay attention to something a little different than what I usually pay attention to. So yeah, I think the irony is that I wasn't actually great at that job. I was really, really good at mentoring the students, working with the students, right? Bringing that care and concern and focus and education, information, I know a lot of things that I could bring to them, but in terms of being a director of a program at a college, that called on skills that I actually have been developing since leaving that work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, a lot of women, including myself, could definitely benefit from thinking it in that way. If I look at my life, then I probably would be happy to go, oh, that was, not good that this and this and this and this happened. But what sort of actions do we take to make that change? Yeah. Absolutely. I can remember having some people here in the house, and they were looking at some of the books that I'd written, which also have Franz's name on them, but I made sure my name was first because I was the person who wrote the books, right? So even then, taking them to the publisher, I'd made sure it said Bromwyn and Franz Steiner, and then the publisher changes it around to Franz and Bromwyn Steiner, and I went, excuse me, no, that's not happening. My name goes, what are you doing? Oh, we didn't even realize we'd done that. I was like, okay. So, but, I remember having someone here in the house they'd come from overseas, and they were looking at these books, and I was talking to them about the book, and they said, oh, you wrote that. I was just so mortified, and I felt like I had to defend myself. I didn't know what to say because there's this expectation that, as a parent, the person who was looking after the child, that I actually wouldn't have the facility or ability to be able to do that. I didn't know how to put myself forward as that person. And it's up to me, this is the thing. I could complain about it, but it's up to me to ensure that no matter how society is dealing with my place as a woman, as a mum, that I also take recognition and I stand up for myself in those sorts of positions. Yeah.
I love Reiki for people who struggle with gender identity too. I think it's just such a beautiful medicine for that, and really so specific. And it really does come down to, at least in my point of view, it's being true to you,
Yeah.
Where are we much more than one gender? What parts of ourselves get repressed through patriarchal norms, and what parts of ourselves get expressed through matriarchal norms. And I think even more so, for somebody who struggles with gender identity, it's like really stepping into who they really are. Well, I have a lot of heart for that, because I know how much courage that must take, every day, wearing your difference, and I think that's one beautiful aspect of Reiki, something that really inspires me.
And that's one of the reasons I really love the translation of the fourth precept as, just for today, I'm true to my way and my being. Because it's just such an invitation to what you were just exactly speaking of. Just truly paying attention, like, what is it that is true to me, right? From the healthy, balanced, whole part of me, right? Not the hurt and damaged and traumatized parts of me, but the part of me that's always whole and always healed and always complete and true. How do I walk through this world from that place, right? And how do I fortify myself for the resistance that will probably come if anybody does that? Right? How many people get to walk through this world true to their way and their being and not meet resistance about it?
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think, and I agree with you that is a great interpretation of that particular precept. If we look at one of the versions prior to that, which is to do your work honestly, I think if we link the two together, because what it's saying is exactly what you're saying, that to be true to who we really are, that we need to work at it. It's not actually just going to be like, it's okay, I am who I am.
That's why you put your name first.
Yeah.
You did the work.
Well, and I know we're going to get much more into the precepts in our next conversation. And I love this idea of how they work together in particular, because if we're, like you just said, if we're just asserting, I get to be myself, and we don't filter that through diligence, through doing our work honestly, through compassion, through gratitude, through not being, attached to our anger and our fear, then we can actually cause a lot of harm just doing what we want to do, right? Like, I'm going to be myself no matter what. Well, there's actually some balancing that needs to happen inside of that, right? Like, we can actually cause harm if we don't bring all of these precepts together in our life. And I really look forward to our conversation about that in our next segment.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing with me. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. This
Awesome.
is such an amazing project. So glad to be in it with the two of you and everybody that's walking along with us.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear more from others about their, experience of society, gender, and how Reiki has helped them.
Yeah. So to those who are listening or watching along with us, we'd love to hear your responses to these questions. What has it been like, living your life, and how has Reiki impacted that for you? We'd love to hear your comments about that. And if you have interest in talking with us on this podcast about these subjects, please do reach out to us. We can have a conversation. You're welcome to join the journey in any format that works for you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.